Welcome, everyone, to another exciting episode of the YouTube show and podcast, None of Our Businesses, where I, Ty Carr, and two of my comrades, Jack DiMatteo.
Hello, everyone.
And Charlie Zygmunt.
Hi, everybody.
We talk about news in business, tax, accounting, all from accountants' perspectives. That's three accountants here, our perspectives on those topics. What are we going to talk about this week? Well, what does the COVID surge mean for elective surgeries? And would you believe a pic of pushing a rock uphill has sold for about 1.3 million? It's an NFT thing. Cyber attacks on healthcare. And a tech exec gets prison for COVID fraud. And finally, Delta Airlines charging employees extra for health insurance if they're not vaxxed. All right, well, we got a good set of topics to get into here, so we'll kick it off today with Jack.
Okay, starting us off this week, a little bit about, everybody's favorite topic, COVID. So now with the drumbeat and the murmurs getting louder about possible shutdowns, hospitals are making decisions again about elective surgeries. And in the article, kind of one of the things they said is when you hear something like elective surgeries, you start thinking about, getting a mole removed or plastic surgery or things of that nature, but it's really a lot deeper than that. Cancer treatments, heart surgeries, heart treatments, things of that nature can also fall in the elective surgery category. So hospitals are struggling to get out ahead of this and not see all the delays in these elective surgeries, because the interesting part to it all is regardless of COVID and what may be happening, a lot of these different systems, they're trying to turn a profit. And if they're not trying to turn a profit, they're trying to not hemorrhage money. And a lot of the ways they do that is by offering a lot of these elective surgeries. So now that it looks like, we may be headed towards some shutdowns and some more mandates and restrictions, hospitals are trying to get out of this and handle that whole dilemma a lot better than they did the first time around, because basically they had, cleared the decks to allow for a lot of COVID patients, which in a lot of cases never even really materialized. And, they postponed a lot of elective surgeries. And when, like I described earlier, when you've got cancer or heart problems, somebody else might call it elective, but I think you'd probably call it an emergency. So, I don't know what you guys experienced on the first go around, but got a chance to read this article. What did you guys think?
Well, I think it's interesting to just kind of think about where the true bottleneck is, because on the one hand, it's hard to get qualified healthcare professionals, and that can be one challenge. Another one is just hospital beds. You might have doctors who are able to do these kinds of elective surgeries, but they just don't have a physical premise anymore that they can utilize for that purpose, because it's full of people who have COVID or other issues. And so I think it's really just kind of an interesting dive into where that bottleneck is. And then, how can we actually solve that issue? How do we make more beds available, more hospital, space available, or get the actual underlying issue of COVID under control so that all of these other tertiary things can take place like they normally would? What do you think, Ty?
Yeah, this one actually hits close to home for me, because it turns out the people that that I've talked to recently know this about me, but it turns out that I have the hip of an 80-year-old. We don't know exactly how that happened, but my left hip has osteoarthritis, the end stages of osteoarthritis, with no space between the bone and the hip and no cartilage left. And it's just kind of it's a weird situation. We assume that there must have been an injury or something sports related earlier on in my life that would have caused me to be in that condition, because it's not normal for somebody of my age to have that. But the only recommended course of action is a hip replacement, like as if I was, a couple of decades older, right? So, and so that is an elective surgery, but one of the ways. We're here in Oregon, and Oregon at this time is kind of been in the news for whatever reason, for having problems with the hospitals being overrun, kind of thing. But one of the ways that seems around it, I think, Jack, what you spoke to rings true to me, in the sense of a lot of times the specialists, particularly like orthopedists that are doing, they're kind of they're in a business to some extent, right? So it actually, when they don't have the ability to do surgeries, it's both a problem for the people who need the surgeries, but it's also a problem for the doctors as small businesses that's their livelihood is doing these surgeries, and then to be closed out of being able to do them in the hospitals could affect their livelihood. The way the doctors that I was talking to, one of the ways they have around this is that, to some extent, is that they'll do an eval on my hip, and it's possible that my surgery can be done in their own clinic surgery center. So they've got like a little surgery center in their clinic. So you don't actually go to the full on hospital. You do the surgery in the surgery center, and then you like walk out the same day kind of thing. I don't know that I'll walk out per se, but you get out the same day. And so if that's possible, depending, on how I think they do some evaluation to see if that's possible, then the fact that it's an elective surgery and that the hospitals otherwise may be full won't make a difference for me. But it could make, if that's not, if for some reason the nature of my surgery requires more care and more aftercare and all that, then I probably will have to postpone doing anything with this hip surgery thing until next year because of the state of hospitals right now in our area. So yeah, that issue hits home for me. But for me, it's not like some of the things that, Jack, the situations you were pointing out. One of the mysteries about my hip that the doctors don't know is they don't know why I'm not crying every day about it right now, because it actually isn't that painful for me. It's awkward. Like, it causes me to walk with a limp, so it's mechanically awkward, but it's not particularly painful. And they say, like, most people are like screaming for the surgery because it's really painful every day. So I'm kind of on the fence whether I even really want to get cut into, but yeah, so that's my little story for everyone and my relationship to this particular article.
Wow. Man, sorry to hear about that diagnosis, but hope all, you get the treatment you need and you make a speedy recovery. In that vein, there is a very good movie that makes its run, and I don't want to. It's spoiler alert. I don't want to give anything away, but it's called My All American, and it's something similar to you. What kind of what you said. It's somebody that was doing something, and you wouldn't imagine them, even playing at the level that they were, and what they ended up happening to them. It's Coach Darrell Royal down in Texas. They asked him the best player ever heard. It's probably a guy nobody's ever heard of because he wasn't a big pro or a prospect. But watch the movie My All American if you want to see a movie about like just something incredible, kind of along those same lines. Again, don't want to give it away in a spoiler alert. But Charlie, I know you've probably got a great article that takes everybody's mind off a spoiler alert, don't you?
Yeah, definitely. I think nothing distracts us better than our own stupidity. Now, bear with me for a moment here, not us particularly, just the world, humans generally. Found a article in Crypto Decoded called "Somebody Just Paid $1.3 million for a Picture of a Rock." And so it's let's go over that again, just because it's a lot. It's a lot to take in. So it's not a rock. Okay, it's that would be ridiculous. It's a picture of a rock, a JPEG to be specific. And we talked about this a little bit on the podcast before. There's this new idea called NFTs, which is non-fungible tokens. And it's this idea of basically artificial scarcity of something, whether that's a picture that can easily be reproduced or something else. And then they limit through blockchain technology how many of those can be circulated. And so that's kind of what's driving up this rarity. That's kind of what's driving up the value of this item is its rarity. It said that it sold for 400 Ether. Like I said, that's about 1.3 million. It's a company called Ether Rock that's been doing this crypto things on NFTs since about 2017. So it's one of the oldest non-fungible tokens available. They came out and said these virtual rocks serve no purpose in caps beyond being able to be bought and sold and giving you a sense of pride in being an owner of one of only 100 rocks in the game. So that's your value proposition there. And I think it's really interesting because we have all of these issues. I don't know. We have all of these more practical things that people could be doing with their money, and then they're doing this instead. And so it's just interesting to watch it play out. The other thing I thought was just kind of interesting as I was reading the article, I was thinking about it and I was like, well, it's a little ridiculous that it's a picture of a rock, but if we go back, De Beers showed us how to price gouge rocks in the first place because they made diamonds seem valuable when in reality they aren't. Then the pet rock came along and they showed us, that it gets stupider, right? There's layers to this. And then these guys now came up and they don't even have a rock. They just have like a picture of a rock. So I just think, how silly can we get? What do you guys think about this? Is this the way of the future?
Well, I guess so. If there's 100 of these things and this sells for about 1.3 million, then we're saying the valuation of the concept altogether is over 10 million.
I guess I'm going to use quotes just to say I don't agree with any of this, but yes.
Oh, that's great. Yeah, I mean, yeah, I don't have anything to say. It's an NFT thing, I guess. Yeah, I don't know. I saw the picture online and I think I recognized it. It's like stock photo. I'm sure I've seen it on people use it in various different kinds of graphics before. So yeah, interesting.
The only takeaway I got for this, when you talk about 1.3 million, you mentioned a pet rock, which is my favorite. And I'm old enough to remember people who getting pet rocks. And the big deal was the guy that invented the pet rock, he became a millionaire. Feel like Austin Powers here. What's $1 million in today's world? So I guess stupidity even comes with inflation. So now it's 1.3 million for just one of these pictures. But now this next article, we've talked about this on this show a little bit, and cyber attacks. So I guess the first time it happened, it was to an oil company. Everybody hates oil companies everywhere, so who cares? Especially if you lived on the West Coast, because only on the East Coast did they run out of gas. So it got a little bit worse with the second cyber attack, was chicken wings. We all, chicken wings, that's America, right? Cost of the chicken wings went up. That's an outrage. This next one out of Marietta, Ohio, the Memorial Health System, victim of a cyber attack. So these start, hitting a little bit closer to home. And we were talking a little bit earlier here about elective surgeries and hospital functions. But if you start thinking about that, if they got the ability to shut down a hospital, with, life-saving equipment hooked up to people and hold that ransom, I think, again, these articles kind of get buried with all the other craziness we see on a day-to-day basis. But, I think it's a real threat that, they can get into things like, healthcare systems and shut these things down. I think, as these things progressively happen, again, it just seems eerily like a poke and a prod. And at some point, we're really going to get caught, no pun intended, with our pants down. And we're going to have a situation that's going to be, really tragic. What'd you guys think of this article?
I mean, the first thing that came to mind is, can you imagine being a staff, like an IT staff at a hospital right now, who's trying to preach trying to make security better at a time like this, when all eyes are focused on, the practicalities of having all these people coming through the hospital. Seems like nobody's interested in talking about structural infrastructure type tech issues like this. But the more that we are overwhelmed in the hospital system, the more that becomes an issue. And yeah, it's sad to say, but some people just want to watch the world burn, I mean, some people just see this chaotic thing and basically take it as an opportunity to add chaos. So it's sad to see, but I hope that they can prioritize getting their tech in order so that they can effectively give, healthcare aid.
Yeah, I think that's right. I mean, that's an interesting take on it, Charlie, that, it's not just profiteers, but just people who just want to stick a clog in the wheels of society and just mess things up just for the sake of messing things up. And I think you've got both going on, right? You've got opportunists that are going to try to take advantage of the situation, and then you've got anarchists that just want to kind of see everything burn. And so you're fighting two different kinds of enemies in that whole problem. And it's a scary thing. And it's beyond me from a technical standpoint. I don't have any kind of technical answers to dealing with this. I think you said it well. Like, hopefully they are able to get their tech house in order, right?
It's funny that you picked an angle I didn't really think of, but If you look at the amount of security it takes to prevent something like this, at what point do these smaller healthcare providers, they're not going to be, they can't make the capital outlay to fight these kinds of things off. It's kind of like we see it in banking all the time. You can put regulations and compliance on big banks, and they're big enough to absorb that. I mean, in this case, you'd think a bigger bank would be better equipped with cyber attacks. But as we've seen with Wells Fargo, some of the other ones, that's not necessarily always the case. But at one point, these smaller healthcare systems, these violations are probably going to put, they run the risk of putting these out of business, because you're not going to be able to make the capital investment it's going to take to be able to stay one step ahead of these cyber criminals. Article for us this week?
Yeah, I do. Just speaking of bad actors, in industrial equipment news, there's a tech exec who got 2 years for $1.8 million COVID fraud. And so it's basically an article looking into just this event that has happened recently, where a man named Mukund Mohan got these 2 years in prison. And some of the interesting things about it was that he was making more than 200 grand a year at an e-commerce company at the time that he was arrested. He put a lot of effort into what he did. Is he basically defrauded the PPP program by setting up fake companies. He did eight fraudulent loan applications, trying to get 5.5 million in aid, and he only actually was able to receive about 1.8 million. But the claims against him in the article were that he had used all of these fictitious employees in order to beef up his numbers and that kind of thing. And kind of the other thing that I thought was interesting in reading about it is that they were able to seize the money. So they got the money back. He had spent a little bit of it, like 16 grand or so, but they were able to get most of it. And then they hit him with a $100,000 fine and then 6 months in jail. Or 2 years in jail, of which I believe there was something in there to where it looked like he was going to get out after 6 months. Yeah, after they saw a 6-month sentence. So I guess what I'm just thinking out loud here is that it's kind of silly that the punishment for this action, like this guy basically went on the line to try to get $1.8 million, basically got away with it momentarily. And then his risk factor in it is 100 grand, right? Because he had that as a fee. And then anywhere between 6 months and 2 years in jail, it just seems not proportional for what he was able to get away with, even if it ultimately got undone, because it's like, well, for every one guy that they caught doing this, how many did they just not successfully catch? And so it was, the lawyer came out and said that he had no criminal history, and that he believes that his actions were possibly triggered by mental health issues, but which I guess, you can be a high performing individual and still have mental health issues. But I just feel like if you're making 200 grand and then you're falsifying all of these documents to get these loans, it seems really convenient to then get to the end and go, oh, well, I wasn't in my right mind. So I just want to get you guys' take on, this whole thing, and I guess more generally what we can do to deter this kind of fraud in the future, because I'm sure the whole age cycle isn't completely over, especially with the resurgence that we're seeing in COVID. So what do you guys think?
Yeah, I mean, the whole mental health excuse seems just that, right? An excuse, because this isn't the kind of thing that you don't have a momentary break and then concoct a complex scheme that requires a lot of paperwork. It's like that just doesn't make any sense. But the other thing that's interesting, when you talk about the risk profile of what he was doing and everything, because I guess the reason that they're able to get a lot of the money back is because it wasn't like he took it and bought a yacht or went on a bunch of vacations or whatever. He was investing the money, right? And so he was getting the money from this government program, and then he was sticking it into investments. And so it's like, well, yeah, I mean, if your possible penalty was like 100,000, I mean, you'd have to think about the rate of return that you would have to have, but it is interesting. It is an interesting kind of finance problem, right? Because I guess you put it into the S&P 500. I don't know if that's what he did, but you put it into investments and you get some rate of return off of that. And it's more guaranteed. Like the probability weighting of getting your return on the investment is higher than the probability return of the SBA catching you or the FBI catching you and paying this penalty, right? So there's a 10%, it's 100,000 out of 1.3 million. There's, it's like a 10% penalty. But you may not make 10% return on investments. You may or you may not, but the 10% penalty is probability weighted, so it's a lot less when you probability weight that. I don't know. I'm just rambling here, but you can see like the financial math that somebody might be doing and coming to this conclusion. I just don't know, and particularly like if he's like in a cozy jail for 6 months, can he still do e-commerce type work or still be making money on the side or something, right? Like, because he doesn't even have real downtime for 6 months potentially, right? So yeah, you have to put all of that into the formula. Like, do you actually lose time from a compensation standpoint for the 6 months? But yeah,
it's funny. It's one of these articles where it's some of it is they bring it on themselves because of the way these programs were rolled out. It just begged for somebody to game the system. Now, that being said, on the other hand, it's the country is in a crisis situation with an impending pandemic. What's the one of the most disgusting things somebody could do is find a way to exploit that and game that system, because one of the reasons I believe behind rolling it out and making it fairly easy for a bit, because the honest people who were struggling and wanted to get employees paid and not lay people off, they wanted to make it easy for them to apply for this money. And the vast majority of them out there did it. I'm pretty sure this guy isn't going to be the only one that ends up serving time or getting busted for this. But that's why I think it makes it just a little bit more despicable that this guy took that kind of a situation, that loophole, to kind of exploit it for his own personal game. And in the end, he got caught. But first time I've seen anything like that in our lifetime. But that's kind of where the dichotomy is if they make it like every other government program, or it takes 6 months to get approval, companies would have been out of business. So they had to make it easy and remove a lot of those barriers. And this guy took advantage of it. And as far as I'm concerned, he got caught with his hand in a cookie jar. He got what he deserved. I don't feel sorry for him.
Yeah, and just to Ty's point about how does this really stop him from doing what he's already doing anyway, he's active on Twitter as of today, giving out like investment advice and stuff. Like I went and looked him up. He's like in there making stock picks and all this stuff. And yeah, it's just interesting to me. But do you have another article we can talk about, Jack?
Yeah, I sure do. Well, when it comes to Twitter, God only knows who's allowed to post and not post. That's a world unto it. That's a whole nother topic for a whole other day. But yeah, I came up with this one a couple days ago, and it's funny. Just in those couple of days, I've had conversations with some other people that have. It's one of those articles I like to bring up where there's a few different takes or looks you could take on this. Now, this one, Delta Airlines is charging their unvaccinated employees an extra $200 a month for their health insurance because they say it translates directly into a $40,000 hospital stay if an unvaccinated person has to go into the hospital. When I originally posted this article, my first thought was like, okay, well, are you charging your smokers an extra $200? What about if you're overweight? If you got high blood pressure, high cholesterol, are you paying an extra premium for that since you're gonna dictate, who's your highest health risks and add line items to it? But it was kind of interesting. This morning, I had one of my BNI meetings with one of the attorneys in the group, and he raised another way to look at it where, and this is a perfect industry for it. I think we even talked about it within the last month on this show about how the airline industry is struggling for people, and everybody on a daily basis reads the article of the canceled flights because they don't have crews to man these flights. And so I'm sitting here thinking, if I'm at Delta and they charge me an extra $200, what the heck stops me from walking to the next terminal and going to American Airlines or United or somebody else who isn't going to charge me $200? And as I was talking about this with this individual this morning, he said, well, it gets even better than that. I guess there is a website for employers. They're called non-mandate employers. So all these employers that are putting these mandates on people, hey, you've got to wear a mask to work, or if you don't get vaccinated by, September 30th, you're no longer employed here. there's a website for employers where they're not making those mandates, not making mask mandates, not making shot mandates. So I think that it's kind of interesting. And this fellow, being an attorney, kind of said, you're not seeing they're kind of government can't make these types of mandates because it isn't constitutional. So what they're kind of doing is working through the private sector and them kind of putting the squeeze on people. So I kind of saw there's a lot of different ways you can interpret or look at this article. Kind of like to see how you guys viewed this one.
Well, there's a piece of the mechanics to health insurance for a big corporation like that I don't quite get because it's like, well, are they doing this? Is Delta doing this because their health plan or provider is doing it to them? Or is Delta like self-insured? It's like, how do they know that their insurance costs are going up by any particular amount based on vaccinated or unvaccinated status? So it's like, it focuses in on Delta, but like the mechanics between Delta and the actual health plan is unclear to me. But I can foresee, like, that's what I'm kind of assuming in my head is, well, maybe there's a self-insurance component to what they do. So it's like, so there is like a risk premium that makes sense for them to charge employees for. But otherwise, usually it's most businesses, they get their health plan from a third party and it's a pass-through cost. It's not like it wouldn't make sense that the company itself just on their own increases the premium for unvaccinated folks.
I mean, the way that I don't know if it has said this, but the way, and I could be interpreting it wrong, the way I read it was that they were otherwise paying for, I don't know, the full cost or some portion of the cost, and they basically reduced the amount that the employer would pay by $200 for anyone that they couldn't prove was vaccinated. I'm not saying I think that makes sense or if that's even right. The only other thought I had on it is I do believe that it costs $40,000 to go to the hospital for COVID. I just don't think Delta pays that. I just think the guy who got COVID, who's in the hospital, who's waking up to his bill is the one who pays that, or in reality just doesn't pay that because that's ridiculous. But yeah, that seemed to me like the more likely outcome of that situation there.
I thought about that was the first thing I thought, and I didn't see anywhere in the article whether they're self-insured or paying a third-party provider, because I guess I could see more of I think if they were self-insured, it'd probably be a whole hell of a lot more than the $200. To me, it just almost sounds like it's really arbitrary in a subtle way to arm twist to get people to go along with it. But it was a frontline healthcare worker that the fellow I was talking to this morning was talking about. And then he talked about, the people that say, hey, I don't want to get this shot, or I don't want to wear a mask, or whatever it is. At some point, they're going to it'll be attractive to go to an employer that doesn't have that, if that's something that's important to you. So I have a funny feeling this is going to get very interesting in the next few months with employers trying to make these mandates. And his point was kind of in an environment where people are just struggling to find workers, and especially in certain industries, it just seems kind of crazy where, what if these people say, well, you're struggling to get frontline nurses. Somebody says, up yours, I'm not getting a shot, or I'm not wearing a mask. You're going to let those people go? I think it'll get a lot more interesting before we get to the other side of this. Thank you for joining us on this edition of None of Our Businesses, the YouTube and podcast show presented to you by three accountants, breaking down today's issues, today's articles. If you like us, share it, tell your friends about it, your family about it, your colleague about it. Download our podcast, listen to it while you're at work, listen to it while you're working in the yard. And if Profitless on Purpose might be more interesting to you, check out our sister show, where they talk about all the nonprofit issues that may interest you. Thank you again for joining this week. We look forward to seeing you next week. Have a good one, everyone.
Thanks, everybody.